Welcome to the DaVinci Hour podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Maxwell Cooper, and in this podcast series, I interview physicians, medical innovators, and entrepreneurs making an impact on healthcare. This podcast is produced by DaVinci Academy, a multimedia medical education company that provides podcasts, video courses, and digital textbooks. You can see more on our website, www.dviacademy.com, and our YouTube channel, youtube.com/c/DaVinci Academy Med. This podcast is sponsored by Doc2Doc, the personal lending platform designed for doctors by doctors. Do you have some big expenses in the near future? Maybe you're moving, applying to residency or fellowship, fixing up your car or home, or starting a new practice. Doc2Doc believes that traditional lenders overestimate the risk of lending money to doctors, residents, and medical students, focusing too much on the challenges of their financial past and giving them insufficient credit for the promise of their financial future. Check out Doc2Doc's personal loan options at doc2doclending.com/DaVinci. Hey everybody, welcome back to the DaVinci Hour podcast. I'm honored this week to be joined by Dr. Danny Goel, a orthopedic surgeon in Vancouver, and then also the founder and CEO of Precision OS, a virtual reality company working on improving the surgical simulation and surgical education. So Dr. Goel, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Max. Great to be here today.
Awesome. So maybe give us a little bit of background on yourself, where you went to school, where you did your training, and just kind of a general overview of your clinical practice right now.
Yeah, sounds great. I was born in Winnipeg, Manitoba. For the people that don't know where that is, it's just north of North Dakota. And I did my med school there, as well as my master's degree in science in actually cardiac physiology of all things. And then I went to Calgary to pursue my residency training in orthopedic surgery. That was a 5-year trip. And from there, I moved to London, Ontario for a 1-year fellowship, and then Boston for a 2nd-year fellowship as well, and then back to Vancouver, where I practice primarily doing shoulder reconstruction.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, the shoulder, there's a lot of shoulder injuries out there, and it's a really complex joint. I remember rotating with some of the shoulder surgeons in med school, and it's amazing, both the arthroscopic and then also the open techniques you guys do. It's pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Certainly it's a fascinating joint.
That's awesome. So I guess your practice, is it academic or is it private practice? Is it like a mix of both? Like, I guess, how does that work?
In Canada, we have what's referred to as community academics, and then academic. And so community is when you're working at a hospital where there's really no teaching and you don't do research. Community academics, where you do have involvement with the residents, the fellows, and then you do some research to your own benefit and for your own interest. And then academics is usually where you're doing both. And then sometimes that's a salaried position. So I practice in a community academic setting where we have teach-ins, where we teach medical students, residents, and occasionally fellows, and where I pursue my own research endeavors. So that's sort of the practice I have.
Awesome. Very cool. I guess, so going off that, what was the inspiration to start Precision OS? I guess you're this busy surgeon. I imagine that kept you busy enough, but what kind of was the impetus for starting this company?
It's a great question. And when I really dig into it, I think it goes back to my own desire to be the best surgeon I possibly could. And, I pursued, powerful residencies with really well-known people who are skilled surgeons. But, despite doing that, I wanted to still improve my skill even more. And so I pursued trips and travel and went to meetings to get better. And it certainly occurred to me that that's not available to a lot of people in the world, where I can't just jump on a plane, not me, but somebody else from, say, different part of the world can't just jump in a plane and go and visit a famous surgeon in X university. Logistically, that's a problem and a challenge. And there's so much value in that type of learning, where you connect with another mentor, because you learn and you see and you hear things that you just can't translate from a video. So when I met Rob, actually, I owe it to my spouse. My wife actually is friends with his wife, and they used to take her kids to gymnastics, and they were friends. And they said, you guys should really meet each other. When I met Rob, who's one of our co-founders, he comes from a game development background, so strong 25-year experience in that space. He introduced me to Colin, who was working in VR. And so the three of us, literally we were in a basement experimenting with VR, and it absolutely surprised me at how engaging it was. And that was back in 2017.
Oh wow. So that's
Yeah,
coming up on a little over 5 years, 6 years now.
that's right.
That's
Yeah.
impressive.
Yeah.
So I guess those early days, when you kind of took that leap, I guess did you start with just a prototype, kind of building it out of your garage, so to speak? And was that, I guess, how did you kind of put things together? How did you essentially build a virtual reality prototype?
As a shoulder surgeon, we started in the shoulder. So we built collectively 8 or 9 different prototypes to say, what can we actually do in VR back in 2017? So back then, you have to remember there was a really high-powered game computer, lots of wires attached to a really heavy headset, and then trackers that were on a tripod to determine where you were in space. And so we built 8 or 9 different prototypes and we showed people because we believe that you shouldn't build something in a silo. You need to expose it, even though I'm a user of our software. We wanted to show it to as many people as we possibly could. And the reactions were astounding. Back then we went to a meeting in 2017 and, we showed medical students, residents, fellows, surgeons in practice, both early and late, as well as the medical device, some colleagues that I know in the medical device space. And immediately you can see the value of VR, but the value comes when you actually put the headset on, not if I show you a video of it, as we all know. Because when you're in a three-dimensional space that's completely digital and looks realistic, your first thought is, wow, this is quite impressive that I didn't actually appreciate when I saw a video. So that type of iterative type of approach is something that we carry with us and have been for the last 5 years.
That's very cool. Very cool. I'm curious, when you're an early startup and you're building a team, it sounds like you found co-founders that were at skills that complemented yours as a
Mhm.
clinician and like you said, the end user as well. I'm curious how have you gone about like building the team? Especially in those early days, what were kind of the criteria? Because in a way it's almost like a marriage in a way when you bring on
Yeah.
co-founders and especially when you talk equity and stuff like that. So I'm curious how did you go about that process?
I think that it's a great question. And early on, we had a lot of conversations about what our goals were. Why do we want to do this? And having never been in a startup before, Rob and Colin have both been involved in startups and they've exited startups in the past. And they know it's a slog. There's a lot of work. It's an emotional roller coaster and it's a commitment, not only for you, but for your families. So the real question came down to why do we want to do this? Are we really interested in VR, or are we more interested in the impact this could have around the world? And that's where we really resonated. So the three of us had that core belief that we could change how healthcare is delivered around the world with this technology back in 2017. So that core sort of belief in what we could do with the product really cemented that marriage. And then we happen to have the complementary skills. Colin is our CTO. He comes from a really strong background of rendering as a software engineer. Rob brings what we do to life, and then I had that educational lens. And one of the things you learn as an entrepreneur early on is you really have to check your ego at the door and really come to terms with what you don't know. And then you talk to people who know about those things to help give you guidance on, you need this person, you need that person. And we built around that to say we need people who are experienced in X, Y, and Z domain because we are lacking those levels of expertise. And you build a company with that mindset.
I think those are excellent points. We were talking before we started recording about how my interview with Mark Cuban, one thing he mentioned about physician entrepreneurs where they can get into trouble is where they try to do everything and they think they know everything. And I think you just illustrated that, go find it. The better way to do that is to find people that complement your skills and, that have experiences that you don't have. So I think kudos to you. It sounds like you've built like an amazing team. I'm curious, so where are you guys now? Where's your product at? What's your guys offering right now? And kind of what stage are you at in that scope of things?
So I think from a company perspective, we continue to commercialize our product. It's still a lot of R&D happening within VR, I would say globally across multiple different companies because the space is still early. And so our customers are the medical device companies and the residency training programs as our two primary customer base. And we sell into them because there's value for them. It's easier to train somebody in a virtual space with another colleague than it is to fly, two surgeons from their homes to a remote location to actually learn those products or learn about how to successfully and safely use a product. So the value captured and delivered through VR is what we are currently focused on. And, we have a team of over 50 right now, 50 people. They're distributed, and that's a COVID phenomenon because we never thought, or at least intellectually, I never thought that we would ever hire anybody outside of Vancouver, but COVID certainly changed that for me for the positive. And so that's kind of where we are as a company.
That's awesome. I'm curious from the medical device standpoint. I guess, is this an opportunity for the medical device companies to let people try, essentially virtually try out their devices, their products? Because I'm sure, orthopedics the similar to IR. There's so many devices out there, and there's so many new devices coming out, and it's almost a whole job just to keep up with what these are. Is that kind of what you're going for? And I guess, how do people demo the devices if that's the case?
So we can actually import a medical device into our virtual environment. And I think what's unique about every medical device has a unique value offering, and they're not commoditized. Some of them are, but some of them are not. And I think showcasing why you would use a particular device in a particular scenario is where VR actually becomes really relevant and valuable. And so they can actually pick up a virtual product and they can actually put it against a virtual bone. And the thing that we do that's unique, is we actually can allow the user to make a mistake using a medical device in a virtual environment. And when you go back to the science of learning, and we know this as physicians, actually it applies to all of us, whether it's physician, non-physician, somebody in music or sports, is you learn the most when you make a mistake. So unless we're delivering that in VR, I think the value is more superficial, but we want to dig deeper into that. So let's use a medical device product, make a mistake in VR so you don't make it in the operating room. And at the same time, learning about the value proposition of that medical device.
I think that's an excellent point. As a resident in training, I can certainly attest to that. I learn much more from when I make a misstep or a mistake than when
Right.
I'm cruising along doing what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
So I think that's an excellent point. And I think with virtual reality, what's so great is that you kind of it's a little bit of a decreased stress environment. Like I can attest as a trainee. When you're in the case and it's live and you don't want to mess up, you don't want to piss off your attending, and it's a little bit more not always the most ideal learning environment. So I think, it's great that the trainees and even other doctors who aren't familiar with the devices can test these out. I think that's awesome. I'm curious, is there, like, to get that tactile feedback, is there, I guess, what's your guys setup? Like, do you guys have a headset? Do you have, like, hand pieces? I guess, how do they get that? If there is a tactile feedback component to the device, how do they get that?
So we use the Meta Quest 2, which is it's built by Meta, or what used to be Facebook.
Sure,
And
sure.
with the Quest 2 headset come these controllers that actually have actuators in them that vibrate when you need them to. So if you're, say, drilling through bone or cutting through bone with a saw, the controllers can actually vibrate according to the thickness of the bones. So this is where the brilliance of Colin comes in, our software, our CTO, we can change the vibration of the controllers if you're drilling through thicker or thinner bone, which actually emulates what we do in real life or what we see in real life. The other thing that happens is the sound of the saw or the drill changes. So when you drill or saw through thicker or thinner bone, there's a change in sound, which we refer to as pitch. And then, of course, the third thing which is the bone actually can deform. So we actually make the bone deform if you're cutting it or drilling it. So those three core feedbacks are available in addition to what we see with the control of the haptic. And the question that we always ask, or certainly I'm continuing to deliberate in my mind, is if we have a combination of those three core things currently in VR, how much more do we need to transfer that skill to the operating room? Is that enough, or do we need more? And I don't know the answer to that yet.
That's awesome. I'm curious, what type of feedback are you getting from both residents and then physicians in practice in terms of the devices? Do they feel like it translates well when they go to use the device? I guess, what kind of feedback are you getting in that regard?
So we have two modes of feedback, I would say. One is we've proven it in the lab that it actually does transfer skill. So we published in two big journals, and there's actually multiple journals now that have published on our product showing that when you use VR and comparing it to watching a video, reading a paper, or even doing a practice in a cadaver, that it's equal or better than doing any one of those three. The next part of it is, does it translate into the real world? We've actually shown with a case study that we can take an completely inexperienced resident who's never done a case of this type before, have them practice in VR for about 10 to 15 minutes, and then do that exact procedure in the OR the next day. So that's the first part. What we get from feedback is the residents know that they're lacking in surgical exposure because of everything that's happened over the last, say, decade. Decreased hours in the OR, decreased exposure to volume of cases, et cetera. So they're hungry for getting more content or access to surgical skill. From a surgeon perspective, it's a way for us to connect to other surgeons because mentorship is so powerful. And you know what it's like when you go to a meeting. I want to be around people that are much smarter than me, that are gonna teach me about how to think about a problem. And not just think about a problem, but if I can be in their operating room, that is allowing me to appreciate what's referred to as embodied learning. What are the little nuance they do with the arm or the leg, or, with the particular patient position or instrument that doesn't translate very well, either in a written form or in a video format. So we're getting really good feedback on both ends.
Very cool. Very cool. I'm curious from the residency training standpoint. You said those are your other main customers of the
Mhm.
programs. I guess how are they integrating that into as their training? Is it something where the resident, maybe the night before, or a couple of days before, would demo the surgery they're going to do, or is it more kind of like what people do traditionally in like cadaver labs, where everyone groups together and they kind of practice their skills and things like that? I guess how are you guys integrating it as far as that goes?
So it's a really great question, Max. And how we see our solution being integrated is we've released the world's first VR-based curriculum. And we've taken all our content and aligned it with the standards we see with ACGME in the US, as well as the Royal College of Physician Surgeons in Canada, to allow residency programs to actually integrate the solution into their curriculum, into their actual training program. Because simulation historically has been, a product that sort of stands in a room and you sort of go there when you need to. But the analogy I use, it's sort of like having a basketball without a net. You don't really know where to, how you're doing, how you're performing. So to avoid that, we actually want to make sure that the software gets used on a regular basis. And we've done that by introducing this curriculum.
That's amazing. I think you've heard quotes, as I'm sure you have, where people say things like, "Oh, well, VR was it's a technology that's maybe ahead of its time," or something like
Mm-hmm.
that. And that I feel like that may have been true a few years ago. Curious if you agree with that or not. But now I think, especially with programs like this, where you have a curriculum, you have a way to use it, integrated, it's following the ACGME. I think that's just amazing, and I think this is something that will greatly, improve surgical and procedural education. I think that's awesome.
I agree. I think it becomes another tool that we should deploy for the trainees at that level to help them enhance their skill if they're not getting it. And it just becomes part of their learning profile. And then, of course, on the surgeon side, we talked about that with that value of mentorship. But I don't think it's there to replace anything. I think it's there to significantly enhance your learning experience.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I think, and like you said, that, there's been criticisms with the work hour limitations and things like
Mhm.
that with people getting less cases. And also there's, as you know, there's a lot of heterogeneity out there. Like it's
Right.
not every program's the same. And even within each program, I'm sure you can attest to back when you were a resident, like, attendings do things so differently. And,
Right.
certain attendings will let you do more and some will let you do less. And so I think, you could still, let's say there's a case where you do less. I feel like with VR, you could still get a lot out of that
For
case, even
sure.
by like, prepping for it and then even practicing it on your own afterwards.
I think it moves people into becoming a much more active learner, because you can go into VR ahead of time. And then when you go to the operating room, you're already thinking sort of layers and layers above, where if you didn't go into VR ahead of time, because you can do things like you can move the C-arm around, you can, pull the anatomy out of the virtual patient. And I think it drives a deeper level of understanding to make you more of an active learner when you actually are in the OR.
That's awesome. I'm curious, is there a way for, I guess maybe you guys are rolling this out or considering this where, you could have a master, if you will, or like someone who's world famous in some type of technique. Could they virtually teach, a set of residents or other, or just even, attendings out there that want to learn more, like you said? Is that something that you see as a reality in the near future?
Actually, it's a reality today, I
Oh,
would
that's
say.
amazing.
So we've done experiences where we've had surgeons in Europe, surgeons in Asia, North America, and Australia connect all in the same virtual space at the same time, where they're avatars and they have a frank dialogue about what they would do with a particular scenario. So that's happening today. So I think that's just going to get deeper and deeper in value as we sort of move through in the next several months and years.
That's amazing. I'm curious from the business standpoint. So I guess your business model, it sounds like your two main customers are the medical device companies. And I guess one for them is they probably look at it as almost a marketing standpoint, like where, surgeons become more aware of their devices and then also become more comfortable with them. And then the programs, is it like a subscription model, or I guess how are you guys generating revenue in those two regards?
So I'll talk about the medical device companies for just a minute as well, because I think this is important. So the medical device companies, they employ several hundred, sometimes thousands of medical device reps. They are such an important part to what we do in the OR that if they're new and don't know the products, they need to get onboarded onto the products. So we've done sessions where we've trained up to 300 medical device reps using VR, because that's what they have to do anyway before they go to the OR and support a surgeon like me or somebody else. So because they're such a critical part of what we do in the operating room, the medical device companies do use our products to train their own salespeople. And because it's very lengthy and it's complex before they can actually get to the OR and to support a surgeon. So that's the first way they use it. The second part they use it is, like you mentioned, is to educate people and to connect people peer to peer, surgeon to surgeon. That's the two ways. And the business model is a subscription business primarily on both the residency and the medical device side.
That's interesting. I didn't even think of that. That's a great point about training the reps on the devices. Cause like you said, it's the same thing in IR. They're often very critical to,
Mhm.
how you use the device, and their knowledge and expertise in that regard is always, very helpful, especially if it's a device you're unfamiliar with. So
Right,
that's amazing.
exactly. Yeah.
So I guess as far as I'm always curious with these new technologies like this, what have you guys gotten any pushback from people especially maybe in the more so in the early days, before you had done studies and things? And I guess what type of pushback did you get? And I guess how did you overcome that or mitigate it?
So certainly pushback. And I think we see that with every single new technology. And I'll tell you a story where a personal story is when the iPhone came out. I actually bought an iPhone, but I had a BlackBerry. I don't know if you remember what a BlackBerry is.
Yeah, I had
So
one.
yeah,
Yeah,
did
yeah.
you?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So I purchased an iPhone and I actually returned it because I liked the tactile sensation of my BlackBerry more.
Me too. Me too.
And no, you did. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
And the person behind the counter says, you're the first person that's ever returned the iPhone. And I said, well, I really like the tactile feel of my BlackBerry. And of course, now I own an iPhone. Naysayers are really important for product development. I think you need to have pushback on your product to make you better from a business, from product perspective. Because if you don't have it, you could be going along this pathway. Unless you're really lucky, where you knock one out of the park and everybody loves your product out of the gates. But I think naysayers help you build a better product and deliver deeper value. So we welcome them. So when someone says, Danny, I like your product, I say this is great. But I would always ask them, tell me what you hate about it. What do you really don't like about it? Where do you think the gaps are? And with that type of information, that's how we made our product where it is today. But we continue to capture that negative feedback. And things we hear are probably the things that you've heard with VR is, the haptics, the headsets are big. I don't want to have a computer. And all these things are slowly disappearing. So we don't have a computer anymore. Computers in the headset. The controllers are getting smaller. Danny, it's expensive. Well, it's very cost effective now to get a headset. You can buy it from Best Buy for $400, where it used to be, $1,700 or $1,800. So all those things that we consider to be barriers from a hardware adoption perspective are disappearing. And then, but the naysayers have been very important for us.
That's awesome. I'm curious from the education standpoint, I guess kind of looking into the future, you've just released this curriculum.
Mhm.
I guess how do you see that, I guess, playing into, I mean, do you see people almost doing like rotations virtually or like anything? And I realize I'm being maybe esoteric here, but I guess doing, rotations with people in other facilities to learn like specialized techniques or things like that. Or I guess, where do you foresee kind of the evolution of this in the education realm?
I think there's no limits. We could have people teaching residents and fellows from anywhere in the world. And in fact, this week, February 16th, we are actually doing a VR professor series. So we have a surgeon from London, Ontario. We have another surgeon from Calgary. We have a resident from New York that are all going to be in the same virtual space learning about how to do knee surgery, specifically ACL reconstruction. And there's going to be people from all over the world attending. And so this is where I see this going, is we're truly providing accessible education to people anywhere in the world.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I'm curious, as an end user yourself, how have you used this in your practice, and how do you think it's made you a better surgeon?
So I've gone into some of our apps. So we've done shoulder arthroscopy. So being a shoulder surgeon is I feel like when I go in there, that I have a deeper understanding of the anatomy and how I would do things, how I'd position the patient than I did before. And that's being in practice for 10 years. So again, check your ego at the door, or check my ego at the door, and say, what do I really not understand well with this particular problem in this particular scenario? And how can I use this to leverage that? So this is how I find it to be extremely valuable, and certainly increasing my engagement with it.
That's amazing. And then I guess back to the business end, I always like to ask this is, I guess, we're as far as fundraising, I guess, how did you guys how have you guys done with fundraising? Like, what, have you done multiple rounds, and I guess where are you at in that, and are you still looking to raise funds at this time?
I once read that the role as CEO is to do business development and always raise money. So, I'm always thinking about that. That's always in my mind. And so we've been primarily bootstrapped actually to date.
Oh
And so
wow.
we've done some small rounds, friends and family, over the years. And we've leveraged in Canada, we have a lot of opportunities for government grants, which we've used to our advantage as well. And so that's what we've done actually in the last 5 years. So we've done no big VC funding to date.
That's amazing. I guess from what I hear, that's the way to do it if you can pull it off, which it sounds like you guys are doing that. That's awesome.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's all about ensuring that we're creating value for our customers and not getting ahead of our skis, so to speak.
Sure, sure,
Yeah.
sure. That's awesome. And I guess as far as fundraising for the future, you guys just continuing to fund yourself and fund through the company.
Yeah, I think it's always a TBD, to be sort of discussed. But we want to take the opportunity to really ensure that our product is serving the value for our customers, and because that's the best type of fundraising is revenue, is when your customers actually pay for your product and are telling other customers about it and new customers. So that's a really important piece to us. We're really focused on our customer.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I'm also curious, how you still practicing full time, and if you are, how are you balancing this company with practicing full time?
Yeah, so I would say it has decreased because I've been traveling a lot because of the business. So when I'm not in town, when I am in town, I usually try to do some clinics, and then I try to operate as often as I can. And really, I've leveraged some of the things that come to surface after COVID. So telemedicine has become a big part of my practice. I can do a clinic from anywhere, and so I do that. I have, and because I'm so focused on the shoulder, that's been nice because my mindset is there, and then I operate, like I mentioned, as often as I can when I'm in town. I think there's two reasons why I still do this. Number one is it's important to be close to the problem. And, you being in a physician as well, that you're seeing the things that are annoying you every day. So you probably are very close to having a solution, because if they're annoying you or bothering you or limiting you, they're probably limiting other people as well. So that's the first reason. Number two, I mean, I really love what I do. I spent 18 years, we all did, medical school, residency, and even before that, bachelor's degrees to get to where we are. And I think what we do is really, really important. And so that keeps me in practice and keeps my sort of passion going. It also dovetails really nicely in what we do at Precision because we're close to the problem. And as I mentioned, being an end user, we want to make sure that we understand the problem intimately from a healthcare provider's perspective. So that really are the two big reasons I stay in practice on an ongoing basis.
That's awesome. No, I totally get it. I mean, we spend all these years, all these sacrifices to become physicians. I imagine that would be hard to give up, and especially if you love what you do, that makes sense that you want to continue to do both. That's
Yeah.
awesome. I'm curious, over the next 12 months, I guess, what big milestones are you guys hoping to hit at Precision?
So we have a lot of stuff that's under R&D right now that we're hoping to showcase in the next several months. Our big plan is really the integration with the residency programs. They are the future of what we do in healthcare. And I think having them use the product, part of the curriculum, is a massive focus for us this year. And I think that's where we're really pointed for the next year or so on the training programs.
That's awesome. Well, my last question that I ask everybody is, when you're not running precision or practicing surgery, what do you do in your spare time? How do you find that balance, if you can find one?
So my family gets up super early in the morning. So we have two young boys, so they're up at usually 4:30 or 5 in the morning, which actually works well because we're all up at that time. So I usually spend the mornings with them, and then I head to the gym, and then I go to office or go into precision. And I'm a golf nerd. I like golf a lot. So I did practice a lot before precision, but when I get a chance, me and the boys go to the driving range, and we enjoy that skill set. And then I try to spend as much time as I can, schedule time with my wife as well.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm a big golfer myself. You can
All
see
right.
the balls behind me.
Yeah, I did notice that. Yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah, I've heard there's
Yeah.
some great courses over there on the west coast of Canada. Is there
They're
one that's your
beautiful.
favorite out there?
I play at this course called Northlands, which is close by, and it's a public course. I don't have a membership anywhere, and I don't think I will, because I like the diversity of courses.
Sure.
And it's a really nice walkable course, and I usually play I used to play the back nine years ago, which I could finish it in about an hour because it was just me on the back nine, and I'd walk it super fast. But there's so many beautiful courses here, Max, so many, and they're hilly, and depending on where you go, and it's lush because we're in a rainforest here, which is quite nice.
That's awesome. I'll have to get out there sometime.
There you go. You're probably a lot better than I am based on those golf balls you have behind you there.
Yeah, well, like many of us, my handicap continues to go up.
Oh yeah,
as I progress through training. I was much better in an earlier life.
Yeah.
Well, awesome.
Me too.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Goel, thank you so much for joining us and taking time out of your very busy schedule. Really appreciate it. The last thing is, I want to make sure people can find more about you and Precision OS. Where's the best places for people to go?
Yeah, thank you, Max. The people can find out a lot of information about us on our website, and they're welcome to communicate with us through our website. We have multiple email contacts through there, and we're always happy to talk to anybody about what we do or anywhere in the world, because we're passionate about what we do and we think there's great value to be seen.
That's awesome. Well, we will definitely provide the links to those in the description. And thank you again. Really appreciate it. I really learned a lot about VR and the future of surgical training. This is amazing.
Yeah, thank you, Max. Really appreciate you being so hospitable to me and having me as a guest.
Absolutely. Thank you for listening to this episode of the DaVinci Hour podcast, presented by DaVinci Academy. Please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow the podcast on your podcast platform of choice to catch the latest episodes. Please leave a comment or a review and share it with a friend. Lastly, you can find all of our podcasts, video courses, and books on our website, dviacademy.com. Thank you for listening.